YouTube and social media, there are different bubbles. And I think like the European elite, they literally believe that Russia will collapse tomorrow. And we just wait another day, then the Russian economy will collapse, the people of Russia will revolt, and Putin will be overthrown, and then Russia will sue for peace. If you just like watch their media, they repeat this over and over, and it becomes a self-reinforcing bubble. The EU is just this brawling, self-reinforcing bureaucracy, and they're not capable of imagining defeat. They're not capable of imagining different possibilities. They're certain. They're absolutely certain that if they just wait out one more day, then the war will be over and they would have won. And if you talk about irrationality, go back to World War I, and like for those 4 or 5 years where these millions of people were dying for no reason. And the reason why was these leaders just could not accept the possibility that they had made a mistake. They can't afford to admit that, hey, maybe sending Boris Johnson to sabotage peace talks between Kiev and Moscow was wrong. Maybe blowing that Nord Stream pipeline was wrong. Maybe antagonizing Russia these 20 years by expanding NATO to its borders was wrong. These people absolutely refuse to admit they're wrong, and they're willing to sacrifice their own nations. So after 1945, Europe was forced to adopt the ideas of the open society, right? This is Karl Popper, who argued that World War II was caused by fascism, by this excessive embrace of nationalism. So to prevent another great war, societies have become much more open, multicultural, tolerant, and that was a strategy for the EU bureaucracy for the past few decades. That's why they've let in so many immigrants. That's why they've embraced woke ideology, and it's basically made these societies, much more polarized. So you have the real possibility of civil war in Britain, in France, because they let in all these immigrants, and the natives see these immigrants as a threat to their cultural identity. And so, wars are fought because people want to fight them to protect the ones they love, and they fight them for their homeland. But right now, if you go to Britain and you ask them, like, what does Britain mean to you? I think British people would be hard to answer you. If these immigrants in Britain, if you interview them and you say, hey, are you willing to go fight a war in Ukraine to defend Britain? And they'll say, hell no. And the natives are like, why would I leave this land to go die in Ukraine so that these immigrants can take it over after I'm dead? So the idea of, getting these Europeans to go fight anywhere is just ridiculous now. And yeah, I mean, you will conscript quite a few because these European nations have become authoritarian, but it's going to destroy their societies. So Europe is no longer capable of fighting a full-scale conflict with Russia.
Sometimes I get a feeling of some similarities with the Soviets after the Bolshevik Revolution when they were fighting, because the Russians were deeply religious. So when they were essentially going to fight under a Bolshevik or a Soviet flag, the problem then was what exactly are they fighting for? So they kind of had to allow the church to come back in, because this is what people fought for. And I get the same impression now that the Europeans are being told that we have to go and die for them to fight Russia. And if you ask why, they will refer to the nation and the typical things people would die for. But they spent the past years, if not decades, to express their contempt for our faith, our traditions, our culture, and now we're supposed to die for it. I mean, what are we dying for? It doesn't really make any sense. I mean, this is what nationalism is. People kill for it, but they're also willing to die for it. I think the smearing of nationalism, even though it was introduced in the French Revolution with democratization, I think it's been another flaw. But how does this play into the United States? Because the Europeans were a key partner of the US in the past in order to, during Cold War and the hegemonic era. But what do you see the Americans doing now? If they drifting further away from the Europeans, will they abandon bloc politics, or will they simply demand subservience? How will the US build its power moving forward? Because this is what perplexes many European politicians. Every time America slams them or threatens to take Greenland, they all go on Twitter going, well, you know, we're good allies. You need us to be great, but it doesn't appear that this sentiment is shared by Washington. So what will the U.S. build its power on?
Look, the United States is now transactional. It's an empire, and it's going to exploit its vassals. And if it cannot exploit its vassals, it'll just abandon them. So the United States right now, it's uncertain what it can derive from Europe, right? Europe has an aging population. It is not willing to fight wars. It does not have that many able-bodied men. It has very few resources. So the United States doesn't really know what it can do with Europe. And in fact, the United States believes that Europe has been stealing and exploiting the United States for the past few decades. It's the American security infrastructure that has protected Europe, that has allowed Europe to create its welfare state, that has allowed Europe to, the Americans think that the Europeans are just lazy and decadent and corrupt. And so the United States is preparing to throw Europe like overboard, right? Just abandon Europe to Russia and forget about it. And so so the United States national security strategy, it's very clear. It's going to use the Western Hemisphere to project its power overseas. So the example goes out to China where, listen, in the future, China, if you want resources, don't think about the Middle East because it's on fire, right? The entire place is at war. Don't think about Europe because Europe is dead. Don't think about Africa because we're going to challenge you there as well. You're going to have to come and buy resources from the Western Hemisphere, and therefore you're going to have to buy from us. So I think that's the national security strategy going forward. The United States is intent on maintaining its hegemony through the US dollar, and so it needs to make China subordinate to the US dollar, dependent on the US dollar. That in 2028, the Democrats will come in, reverse all of Trump's policies, as Biden did in 2020. And what the Europeans don't realize is that this is a new reality. We're not going back to 2020. Even if the Democrats were to come in 2028, they're going to maintain Trump's imperial policies because this is the best interest of America. America derives no benefit from helping Europe in any way. So what we're seeing is acceleration of the demise of the American empire. So let's go back to Venezuela. And I'm sure, everyone saw what happened where, these Chinook helicopters carrying Delta Force special operators flew into Caracas and killed basically Maduro's security team, Cuban security team, and then escorted him to New York where he was perp walked. And it seemed as though, a triumph of the Romans, right? Where they brought in these kings who they captured and they paraded him through the streets of Rome. And so in America, everyone's ecstatic about this. Everyone thinks this is tremendous. But what people don't recognize is that, the reason why Americans didn't do this in the past is because it's stupid to do this sort of stuff, right? Because why would you insult a nation like this? So not only did the Americans go kidnap a sovereign head of state, who represent the state itself, they also destroyed the mausoleum of Hugo Chavez, who is the spiritual hero of the Chavismo movement in Venezuela, who is the current regime in Venezuela. So Trump has made it impossible now for the United States to seek an arrangement for Venezuela. Even if there's some negotiation that takes place, it's going to end up in bad faith because the Venezuelans have lost trust in the United States. But not only that, but South America right now will rally against the United States. Trump has threatened both Mexico and Colombia. He has his eyes set on Cuba, on Nicaragua. So now the South Americans are like, we can't trust the Americans. We need to stick together, and they're going to resist American power. And then Africa, Europe, the entire world is going to see America for the bully that it is. So listen, America had the greatest military for the past 50, 60 years. It didn't really want to use its military because once you start using your military, you're stuck using the military forever, right? You're better off using soft power. You're better off using covert ops, propaganda, infiltration. And that's what America did really well for these 50, 60 years. And it could have done the same thing in Venezuela where, they could have basically bribed Maduro, bribed the elite to seek an economic treaty with the United States where all oil belonged to the United States. And Venezuela would have agreed to this. And all of South America would have been happy with this deal. But instead it chose to do what it did because it wanted to project strength and power. And so it sacrificed strategy for optics. And this is a sign of an empire in decline where it's no longer capable of grand strategy, where it's no longer capable of foresight, it's no longer capable of restraint and humility. It's complete hubris. We see this all the time when empires are in decline, where not only does it antagonize its enemies, but also antagonize its own allies and exploits its vassals. So what the United States is doing, it's suicidal, it's short term, it's stupid. And look, in the short term, I say for the next 2 to 3 years, it will look great in that, America is able to control the entire Western Hemisphere, all the world bows to America. In the long term, you have sowed the seeds for global discontent, for a global revolution against American power. And basically, I think that the American empire is done with. Maduro, regardless of his faults, okay, and he has lots of faults, he was the head of state of Venezuela. He represents the nation state. So when you kidnap Maduro in this manner and you humiliate him in such a manner in New York City, you are humiliating the entirety of the Venezuelan people and also by proxy the South American people as well. So this can only end in a disaster for America. That's how Donald Trump thinks. He thinks that, oh, I've captured Maduro, therefore now Venezuela belongs to me. And Venezuela now must obey what I tell them because I've captured their head of state. He lives in his own reality. He spent too much time doing reality TV, The Apprentice. And so he thinks that, if I can just make people believe this, it will become reality. And he doesn't recognize that there are these fundamental laws to geopolitics. So an example is, Trump, when he was with The Apprentice, it had the best ratings on TV. But whenever Trump ran a business, he ran it into the ground. He destroyed every single business that he touched. So that's the man he is. And he's gonna get great TV ratings, but he's gonna destroy America in the process. He does not live in our world. He lives in his own world, Trump world, and it's all make-believe. And in his world, he thinks that, hey, if I can manifest this idea, if I can make enough people believe this idea, it will become reality, okay? In his world, he thinks that he is making America great again by resurrecting the American empire. He believes that by, capturing Maduro, by bombing Iran, he is projecting force. And if people understand how powerful America is, everyone will bow to America and just obey America, and all the problems will just vanish. The debt will vanish, the polarization will vanish, all this discontent will vanish. Look, Trump is going to continue his attacks everywhere, okay? So expect land strikes against cartels in Mexico. Expect land strikes in Colombia. That's a massive American Navy assembled in Caribbean. It's not going away. It's still going to, attack fishing boats. It's still going to do what it's going to do. So the American military presence in the Caribbean, it's only going to increase because what Trump wants to do is bring the entire global south under its control. And then in April, when he goes to China, he now has leverage over China. Okay, everything is leading to April, where Trump wants to sit down with China and negotiate a grand bargain in which, and an example is where, okay, you know what? You're the subordinate to the empire, China. So what's going to happen is this. We control Venezuela, but we will allow you to go into Venezuela and build the oil infrastructure so you can extract it and buy from us with US dollars. Okay, that's literally what Trump has planned in April. There's a lot of different factions who propose different strategies. Some are very pro-Russian and says, listen, in the long term, we're better off with Russia. But there are also some more factions who are like, you know what, we don't become too reliant on Russia. If we get 100% of oil supply from Russia, that's gonna be a problem. So maybe it's better to get 50% from America, 50% from Russia. So you have a whole spectrum of views, and what China will decide in April will depend on how these different factions coalesce together, and they will also have to look at the geopolitical environment, and then there's these domestic concerns as well. So I couldn't tell you right now what will happen in April, but my thinking is, if I were a betting man, I would think that China and the United States will come to a grand bargain. But this grand bargain will not actually alter the geopolitical landscape, meaning that the empire will still collapse. and you'll still have wars raging around the world. The Israelis helped to elect Trump because remember, Miriam Adelson gave $100 million to Trump, right? So, and a lot of it was that Trump agreed that he would resolve the Iran issue, and we saw that in June in Operation Midnight Hammer. But Trump is transactional, so he is going to invade Iran at some point, but he wants to maximize his own personal benefit. Okay, so what this means is that he's looking for as much as possible from the Israelis. So what's happened is that Elon Musk has promised Trump $200 million for the midterms in November. Miriam Adelson has promised Trump $250 million if he were to run for a third term. Okay, so Trump is just trying to maximize as many benefits as possible before he pulls a trigger and orders an American attack on Iran. But all the seeds are in place, right? Because we're seeing all these protests in Iran. We can never know for sure the extent of these protests, but we can know that, listen, you have these Mossad agents in there. You've got all this American special forces in there. A lot of money is being spent on bribing these criminal networks, minorities, dissidents to cause as much havoc as possible in Iran. And quite honestly, Iran itself is facing a lot of economic issues because of this American embargo. So Iran is in a lot of trouble in 2026. But whether or not Trump pulls the trigger in 2026 is, I can't tell you. It's possible he launches more strikes. But the real issue is, will Trump launch a ground invasion of Iran? Because Israel wants regime change in Iran. And the only way we can do that is with ground troops. Airstrikes won't do it. And Israel itself cannot do it by itself. So it needs the United States to send in ground troops. So 2026, I think we will see an acceleration of events. But maybe 2027 is when we'll have the full climax. Facts don't matter to Trump, okay? They've never mattered to Trump. They tried for the longest time to give Trump press briefings, right? Daily briefings where he was updated on geopolitics. And at first it was a page, and they recognized he doesn't even have the attention span for a page. So they made it a paragraph, and they recognized, oh my God, he can't even read a paragraph. So what they figured out was that this guy watches TV all the time. So if you want Trump's attention, if you want him to recognize certain aspects of foreign policy, you need to go on Fox News and tell it to him there. Okay, so this guy's brain is a TV set. And so he doesn't recognize the fundamental rules of geopolitics. He doesn't understand what it means to be overextended, what it means to have enough resources to fight wars. All he sees is optics, right? So he thinks that this thing in Venezuela was a huge success. Why can't we do the same thing in Mexico? Why can't we do the same thing in Cuba? And why can't we do the same thing in Iran? So for Trump, it's all about optics, about visuals. He sees these Delta Force operators flying into Tehran and blowing things up, and that's how his mind works. I think he is consistent. He's a mafia boss, and that's what people don't really understand about him. He's not the president of the United States. He's a mafia boss, and once you appreciate that, then he's easy to deal with. Just don't trust him. Just don't take what he says just don't believe anything he says. He's going to do what is in his own personal best interest. Not necessarily in the best interest of the United States, but his own best interest. He's going to do what makes him look good. This Maduro raid was counterproductive for the United States. It really hurt the American standing around the world. It made America look like a criminal enterprise, but he doesn't care because it made him look good on TV. Yeah, so I would say that this event in April, when Trump visits China, Trump needs to figure out a lot of things before April. Okay, so what we're seeing in South America is the United States establishing hegemony, military hegemony throughout South America, and we will see an escalation of that over the next few months, especially with regards to Colombia and Mexico. Possibly Brazil as well, where Trump gets into an argument with Lula for whatever reason. Trump likes that to show that he's the boss. We can also expect to see more conflict in Africa as well, because Africa is where, in national security strategy, Trump said very vocally that he will not cede Africa to China, that America and its allies will challenge America, will challenge China wherever it can. And the last area would be China-Japan. So I would say that as time goes by, the conflict between Japan and China will just increase because Trump needs to exert as much leverage over China as much as possible. And then you'll have this meeting in April, and I think there are 4 meetings actually scheduled for 2026. So Trump needs to resolve the China issue, and the reason why is the end game is Iran. He needs to resolve the China issue before he launches a full-scale invasion of Iran. Russia will come to Iran's defense. There's nothing that Trump can do about it. The wild card right now is China, what China will do in response to an Iran invasion. And so the end game is Iran. China is maybe the penultimate boss before Iran. But I think if I were a betting man, and I think people will be surprised by this, China and the United States will come to an arrangement.